The opinions shared in this podcast are those of the host and are not meant to reflect the positions of Nami, Oklahoma, or licensed mental health professionals. If you have questions or concerns about your own mental health, please reach out to a qualified expert. And remember, if you're ever in a crisis, you can call or text 988.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Mindful Moments with Nami NextGen. My name is Anna Bennett, and I'm here with my co-host, Zach Lewis. Today, we're going to be talking about weather anxiety. Earlier this week, one of our other members of the council, Sydney Yaffe, had the privilege to meet with Jack Gerfen. Jack Gerfen is the chief meteorologist at Fox 25, working in Oklahoma City since 2022. Prior to 2022, Gerfen has worked in Illinois and Minnesota after earning his degree in meteorology in Indiana. Notable tornadoes he's covered include an EF3 that hit Taylorville, Illinois in December of 2018, and a tornado outbreak of multiple EF2s that occurred in December of 2021 across central Illinois. Jack also has covered blizzards and ice storms from the road.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Lewis, and I'm going to be one of the new podcast hosts for the Nami NextGen podcast. And for this particular segment, we are going to be going over some of the interview material that Sydney Yaffe did with Jack Gerfen, and I hope you all enjoyed.
So first, I wanted to start and ask if you have any phobias.
I would say in terms of any phobias, I'd say a lot of people in news are very much type A personalities to where, I'm not necessarily afraid of heights or anything, but I would definitely say that I'm afraid of failure. And so I know a lot of people in the news world just tend to just push themselves very hard because we are our own worst critic. And we have people that will tell us that we're bad at our jobs all day, every day on social media, but really it's the internal. That's really where we really kind of beat ourselves up, but it's because we do expect very high quality results from us. So I would say that that's probably my number one fear is just for messing up. And obviously I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get forecasts wrong, but as long as I learn from my mistakes, that's what's most important. But yeah, definitely the fear of failures is definitely a pretty common one across a lot of the news industry.
Yeah, that's understandable. And if you feel comfortable answering, have you faced any significant, anxiety-provoking situations in your career or weather events that really stick out?
Sure. I would say from the career side of things in terms of anxiety there, as the news industry is rapidly changing very quickly, as people are getting more of their information off of social media and off of, YouTube and TikTok and things like that. There's just kind of this overall anxiety and just kind of dread about am I going to be okay career-wise? There's a lot of big companies that are merging together as well, which has resulted in a lot of layoffs. So you have that kind of in the back of your mind too. But when it comes here to Oklahoma, I would say that, I also kind of do suffer from a little bit of some storm anxiety. The main reason for that is that if there's severe weather in the Oklahoma City metro area, I can't be at home with my wife or my kid or our 3 cats. I have to be at work on the green screen. And so even though we have a storm shelter at our house, even though we have always gone through our just scenarios of what to do, it's still an anxiety-inducing thing when we've got the big tornado warning over Oklahoma City, and I can see that my house is in that tornado warning. Just knowing that, yes, my wife knows what to do and things like that, but I'm just not there, and so that's definitely a kind of scary thing to have because despite what people think, the people on the news have just as much of a likelihood of our houses getting hit than anybody else. So we're not in some sort of magic bubble or immune to the risks and the damage that can come from severe weather. So my house could get hit just as much as anybody else's could. And so, I still worry about that kind of stuff as well, just because on those bad days, and there are definitely going to be those days where we know that there's going to be a pretty high end severe weather event, there's that question does kind of pop into my head of what am I going to come home to? Because that very well could be a thing that I'm on TV for this, and we very well could have sustained some sort of damage here at house. So that's a fear that I have too. So obviously that's bad enough, but then you add in the just the concerns about the overall industry as a whole, and it's a lot of just uncertainty the past couple months.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. Phobias are defined as an intense, irrational, and persistent fear disproportionate to the actual risk a situation could cause. Anxiety is the persistent worry and unease associated with situational triggers, often ceasing when the event ends. So, as somebody who studies and communicates weather risks, how would you distinguish between a healthy caution or general anxiety about these events and a weather related phobia that goes beyond the actual risk?
I would say that, we can only control what we can control. And when it comes to being afraid of severe weather, that's obviously a thing that is quite common around here. But what we try to do, not only just myself, but many others in our industry, is that we just try to make sure that, you are aware of the threats, but also know too, at the end of the day, that the likelihood of you actually having any real impacts is extremely low. And you can minimize your personal risk by taking action. And a lot of times, just practicing where to go for a tornado warning, just knowing your plan can actually really reduce the anxiety of the overall environment. Um, a lot of times the biggest fear that we have with people is just the fear of the unknown. And so when you know what you have to do, then you can really minimize a lot of that risk. And when you are able to minimize a lot of that risk and anxiety, then you have a clear head and you can make better decisions when you are really faced with something bad like the tornado warning and the tornado is heading like directly for your place. So we try to go about it as a calm way, but at the same time, we need to make sure that people know what the threats are as well. But we just don't want to scare people. So when it comes to just the overall just fear of storms, we understand that that is definitely a concern, and we do try our best to help minimize that because, like I said, if people are too scared, then they may not make the right choice, even if they actually were not really in any danger, but they make the wrong choice and now they are going to be in more danger. By being scared of a tornado warning, and instead of just going into your bathroom, you end up trying to drive somewhere and then you get stuck somewhere, and then that's far worse position. So just trying to make sure that people are aware of the severity of the event, but also to not scare them either.
Yeah, so going off of kind of anxiety around weather, a lot of that can sometimes stem from like biological effects, so like how your body's feeling. So, what biological effects do different weather events, such as like heat waves and cold snaps and severe weather, have on the human body? And can these factors contribute to your overall anxiety during these weather events?
They absolutely can, because especially when it comes to heat waves, that if you are in a lower income that doesn't have access to air conditioning, we were talking about like measurable problems that your body goes through when it can't cool down. A lot of times we will see that crime spikes in the summertime because it's hotter and legitimately impacts the brain and behavior. And so if you don't have the ability to cool down, for example, in a heat wave, you're going to be irritable. You're probably not getting the best sleep. And, then that's just going to just compound on itself when other situations arise. And so just trying to make sure that you know where to go in terms of, cooling centers across the city. Those are great resources to have people go to those. That way they can help to cool down because, again, not only does it feel nicer, it's legitimately better for your overall health if you can cool down. And the same thing obviously would go then towards your cold snaps. Now, when it comes to those, there's obviously going to be some issues where You might be then thinking more about the cost of cooling your house or heating your house, to where in those extreme instances it gets expensive to do that. So there's obviously then there's the monetary stress too, and if you're already stressed about money, that's going to be compounding as well. And so there's a number of things you can do to try to like insulate your house, just try to make it not so hot in the summertime and not so cold in the wintertime. That way that you can reduce some of that financial stress on you too. But I mean, you could just keep on going in multiple different directions, and the weather can very much play a role in just how people are. I mean, then you factor in the pollen and the allergies too. If you're not feeling good there, that's going to obviously make you more irritable. So the weather could definitely have a major impact too on just on overall behavior. And while there are some things that you can't control, there are some things that you can control. And we always make sure with our station to provide plenty of resources, for example, on those really hot days about where the cooling centers are. That way that people can get cooled down. But yeah, you could take this in a million different directions, and you can always bring it back to the weather will somehow impact your behavior and really just the overall just impacts on the body. And so if you can try to lessen that as much as you possibly can, that's better not only for your mental health, but also just for your overall health in general.
So turning back to your experience, what has been your experience with weather anxiety as a meteorologist? Furthermore, are there any other types of natural disasters that give you anxiety since tornadoes are so common here in Oklahoma?
I would say that the tornado the tornado threat is still probably number one. But recently we've had a lot of fire outbreaks as well, and those are quite scary because the fact that they can move very quickly and they can become uncontrollable very fast. So those, but in terms of an anxiety for me personally, it's just primarily just the tornado aspect. And I don't think my anxiety level would be as high if I was just a single guy. But as a new dad with three cats at home, like those are types of things I think about. And so, like I said, I can honestly control some things, but other things I can't. But what I do know is that, on those big weather days, I will make sure that I put all of our cats are pretty good about getting into their carriers. And so I'll put the carriers out for my wife, and we've got our rechargeable lantern in case the power goes out. So I put the cat boxes out. I kind of close all the doors that way that they are kind of contained in the living room. That way they're kind of easy to snatch. Just that way that I feel safe knowing that when my wife is home with our baby, that if there were to be an instance where she has to act quickly, she doesn't have to go running around the house to get everything. It's all just kind of right there. And so like being able to minimize those unknowns for me helps me out actually quite a bit. So on those big weather days, I'll do that. And, even though I may be kind of a little bit worried about how things go, if I've done that, then that really does help me out.
So going off of kind of being able to minimize what you can control, in your opinion, what is the difference between acting with caution and acting with fear during these events?
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I've really been fortunate to come into experience with here in Oklahoma City that I've not had in my previous stops. Has just been, the National Weather Center in Norman is really where is the nucleus of where everything happens. And obviously, when it comes to just the overall science of weather and understanding new things, everything comes out of there. But what I've really been just grateful to be a part of has been a lot of the social science um, studies that have been occurring there as well. And so, for example, one of the things that I did not know until I came here was how likely your survival rate is when it comes to these big EF4 and EF5 tornadoes. Since coming here, I've now learned that not only has OU done studies, but also NOAA as a whole. There's been actually a lot of entities that have done studies, and they all kind of came to the same conclusion, which is great in the weather world when you have a lot of things that agree with each other. But it's that if you were in a tornado warning and you and that tornado was rated then an EF4 or an EF5. Even if you were just in the polygon, you were excluded from these statistics because you didn't see any actual damage. But what they did was, if you sustained damage from an EF4 or an EF5 tornado, and then obviously like they took into account how many people live in that house or apartment, they have determined that there is a 99% chance that you will survive an EF4 or an EF5 tornado. And I was blown away at how high that really was. We are thinking about the strongest winds on Earth, and yet if you can still get to a sturdy shelter, maybe it's not even the underground shelter or those safe rooms that people have in houses, but just maybe it's the bathroom, that's all you have time to go to. As long as you're in a building that's got a foundation and is a sturdy building, you have a 99% chance of survival. Now, let's say you've got a storm shelter that you couldn't get to, so you go into the bathroom. You might be kind of banged up with some scrapes and bruises, but you're still statistically have a 99% chance of survival. And it's even higher when you go to those underground shelters and those really fortified rooms. So that was one thing that I did not know about before coming to Oklahoma City. And knowing that information has really helped me be better at communicating the threats when it comes to severe weather. Before, I was always kind of under the impression that you have to kind of scare them to get them to act. But what we've now found through these studies as well is that you can legitimately cause someone to stop in total fear and panic, to where maybe they live in a mobile home and maybe they know where the community shelter is and they have plenty of time to actually get there, but because maybe how I worded the severity of this tornado coming towards them, they may just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna just pray, then hope everything is okay, even though they may have actually had the time to go to the shelter, and then they're statistically going to have that 99% chance of survival. And so you can scare people into total fear, and that is one thing that I've learned here, that is a possibility that you could do. So you obviously still want to make sure that if things are really bad, that you do tell them that it is bad, but you have to also give them the hope as well, because you need to give them the hope that way that they will act on it too. Because, like I said, we know that you can actually scare somebody into just sitting in their recliner and just take the storm, when like they didn't necessarily have to do that, but they were just too afraid. And so that's been really one of the great things about being here in Oklahoma City, close to the National Weather Center, is just hearing the social sciences as well, showing that not only do you have a actually really high chance of surviving a tornado, but you can scare somebody into making the wrong choice. Whereas if you still gave them the hope, then they would have made probably the right choice. And that's actually been a really fascinating thing. So for me, that's kind of why I go about things a little bit more calmer, is just because that I don't want to scare people into total fear where they just shut down. I don't want that to happen. So just try to be calm in the situation really helps things out legitimately tremendously. Like as you've heard now, like a 99% chance, which was again great to hear from my perspective, because I always want to make sure that people are safe. There's nothing worse than knowing that you were covering tornadoes and that people had died. But by knowing that they have that statistical chance of survival being that high, you want to make sure that you give them that chance to legitimately reach that goal.
Yeah, that's really fascinating research. I know, personally, I lived through the May 20th tornado, EF5 in 2013 and more. And I can still remember how my teachers and how my parents responded and how calm they were considering everything. So I can certainly believe that having that calm nature really, really does create a difference. So speaking of like when these events occur, what are some ways to manage anxiety while waiting for the storm to pass? And how do we calm our nerves while being aware of the real danger of severe weather? So not too calm, but also not too tense.
Sure, sure. like I said kind of earlier, when you know your plan and you have done plan and you've practiced it and you know what to do and it becomes second nature, that does eliminate a lot of that stress. But let's say you've done everything to where, yep, you've got your wallet, you have your medication, you're wearing your shoes, and you're in your safe spot. And you know the storm is close, but you still are not entirely sure of, where exactly it is. The great thing is that with modern technology, we are able to have the live streams going, and so you can watch my channel as well as many other channels right there on your phone. Um, the all the wireless companies, so AT&T, Verizon, they all partnered with the government to issue those wireless emergency alerts. And so those will go off only if you are geolocated within the tornado warning. So, maybe let's say you hear Oklahoma City is under a tornado warning, but your phone has not gone off, then that does mean that at least as of right now, you're in the clear still. You want to be paying attention, but since your phone didn't go off, you're not exactly where the tornado warning is. So having access to that type of technology while you're kind of waiting things out will also help things out too, because then you'll know really exactly where it is. Um, and the nice thing is that pretty much every single one of the news station apps will work across the country. So it doesn't actually matter if you have our Fox 25 weather app from Oklahoma City. If you are traveling somewhere and there is bad weather, that app will go off for where you are. So you don't have to download anybody else's app if you don't know where you're going. For example, your local apps will actually work across the whole country, which is nice. So having access to a little bit more of the technology, because before, chances are your TV wasn't where your shelter was, and then you just have to just sit there and just kind of wait around. Now you've got your phone that can actually help you out. And then, when you hear us say that your city is all in the clear, or you can just kind of tell at this point based on the radar on the app as well that it's past where you live, then you can kind of come out of there. So having that technology close at hand is also going to be really helpful in just giving you further ease, knowing that like, okay, this was kind of a close call, but I'm in the clear now, and I can come out of my shelter.
Yeah, it sounds like technology has definitely almost eased some of that anxiety,
Yeah.
in some people, so that's great. Meteorologists are some of the most trusted journalists. How do you deal with the pressure of being a person that the public turns to and places their faith in during unexpected weather events?
Sure. I would just say that myself and all of my broadcast colleagues, you just take our job really seriously. Um, a lot of times it just comes from the fact that this is something that we wanted to do for our entire lives. This is also, like I said earlier, you were generally all kind of type A personalities too. So we just want to do a good job, and we care about people too. And that's a lot of reason why we got into this industry as well. Is a lot of times we've just always been the type of people to help others out. And so this is our way of taking our fascination with weather and then applying those personal aspects too about helping people out. And that's why I make a career out of this. And so, yeah, I'm always love to talk to people about weather. Love it when people reach out on social media and ask questions, gladly answer those questions. One of my favorite things to do is actually when people are traveling and they ask for like a personal forecast, like even if they're going out of the state, I like to do that. We just like to help people out, and um, we like to help people out, but also like to look at the clouds too. And that's why this job is perfect for us. But we do take our job very seriously. Um, I don't personally consider myself to be anybody famous or anything like that. However, we do have to conduct ourselves a little bit differently than other people would, just because people do trust us. So when it comes to just other people may be able to go and have a little bit more fun, at like bars and restaurants and things like that, whereas for us, we still got to just keep it a little bit more professional, just because again, people trust us, and there are now with social media, there's now many ways that we could lose that trust pretty quickly. I've been doing this now for almost 14 years, It took a lot of time to build that trust, but I could easily lose it very quickly with just one or two wrong moves. And so, you know, definitely that's one thing that all of us TV people have to kind of think about is just, just got to behave a little bit differently when we're out in public, when other people may be able to kind of have a little bit more fun like that. But it also doesn't really bother me either too, because I like what I do and I don't want to mess it up either.
Yeah. So finally, I just wanted to ask, what is some advice that you would tell somebody who experiences intense stress surrounding uncertain weather events?
Sure. I would just say to again control what you can control. When you are able to control the things that you can control, then you really are able to minimize that stress. If you need to come up with some sort of plan and write down that plan, like a lot of times when it comes to like financial stress, for example, when you're trying to pay off debt, a lot of times the worst part is actually just not knowing where things are. And you can pretty much eliminate like 50% of your stress just by like budgeting and just getting all your numbers out in front of you. And that's actually like one of the easiest things that you can do, and you can kind of see where things are. So the nice thing is that if you come up with a plan that you maybe just want to write down and put it on your fridge, that may very well be take a huge chunk out of your storm anxiety out of the equation because now you know what you have to do. So having the plan and knowing what your plan is really going to be one of the best things that you can do to help get you through the storm. Then also the fact that um, just knowing that again, your overall chances of being severely impacted by a storm or the weather in general is overall extremely low. You know, some of these tornadoes can be quite large, but at the end of the day, though, they're still, Oklahoma City, for example, is a sprawled out major city. You might still be 20 miles away from a big tornado. So if you think about it from that perspective, your chances for really being hit where you are is extremely low. So that's another thing that you can kind of take note of and just know that, yes, there is still the chance that I could be impacted by this storm, but really though, my chances are very, very low. And then also too for other types of weather, like let's talk about, like blizzards and winter weather and things like that. If you stay home, then your chances of really being impacted severely in a negative fashion are are very low then at that point because now you're not putting yourself in danger by being out on the roads and things like that. So just staying home when you can will really help you out as well. Um, or maybe where you work is actually a safer spot. So let's say when it comes to um, let's say tornado warnings, maybe instead of trying to leave work early, you know that you've got maybe you live in an apartment at home, but your work has a storm shelter that's just right down the hallway from you. You might determine that it's actually just safer for you instead of just trying to rush home to actually just wait the storm out just at work too. And then you have not put yourself at any risk by being in the car. You're not trying to scramble. You know that this is what I have to do. And while my boss may think it's weird that I'm staying a little bit later, you know that you feel more comfortable doing that. So just again, knowing what your plan is really is a critical part in the step and will really help to minimize your overall stress. And then just making sure that you've got your technology available to you, like the phone. You can really minimize a lot of it. You'll always have it in the background. You can never totally get away of some of that stress, especially when it does come to a very stressful event like a tornado warning. But just know that at the end of the day, you've done everything that you can. Your overall chances are very low of being hit by one. And then if you are in the safest spot that you know of, you have a very high chance of coming out of there just fine. That will really go a long way.
Thank you so much for talking with me today.
For sure, Cindy. Absolutely. Thank you for talking to me.
Me personally, I don't have anything that would be like clinically diagnosed as phobia. I have generalized anxiety disorder, so I kind of have the fear of everything. but I don't have any specific phobias. However, I am about to graduate nursing school, and in my personal career, I have come across a lot of people that definitely do have phobias and have been able to experience firsthand how much that can affect a person's life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the phobias are very widespread, especially in modern day society. For me, particularly, I was in the May 20th, 2013 tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, one of the strongest tornadoes in Oklahoma and United States history. And I was in the third grade class that lost to 7 children at Plaza Towers Elementary. So definitely a lot of lapsophobia, excessive fear of tornadoes. But I mostly just have weather anxiety, not particularly anything with like hurricanes or thunderstorms. It's mostly just whenever you have that humidity and everything. But
Do you feel like this is kind of going off script a little bit, but do you feel like you remember a lot of the event? I always find it interesting that, at least for me, things that were traumatic that happened in my childhood, I know that they affect me so much now, and through therapy and like digging through different things that I haven't thought about in a long time, I'll randomly remember stuff. But I feel like there's so many holes in traumatic events that happen in people's childhood. Have you experienced that, would you say?
yeah, definitely. With the May 20th tornado in particular, that was my very first instance as a 9-year-old of a very, very strong tornado. And it's definitely something that isn't very, very common. That was the last EF5 tornado in the 2010s, with the last one being in 25 in the Dakotas. But with that particular thing, I did have a lot of trauma that wasn't like necessarily tied to that, with it being like, why did the school administrators not put the third graders like in the main building? Why were we on the outskirts of that? Like that could have saved a lot of lives. But also just like, how do I better prepare, not only as like an individual, but also as someone who wants to be a nonprofit founder? Like, how can I help make a system that's not necessarily perfect? I want it to be perfect, but just something that could save lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for being willing to share that experience with me.
No problem. Thank you so much. I think for me in particular, with my experience as a 9-year-old on May 20th, that it really helped me understand time management in emergency situations. Definitely in that, every moment matters, especially whenever you're having to drive over to, like, say, your grandparents' house to help them get into their storm shelters. And one of the things that I've found to be very, very useful is to get prepared as much as possible. That definitely helps. Get water in your storm shelter. That always helps. Just trying to make small things so that you don't have to worry about them whenever you're in the actual situation. And that's really helped my anxiety. I still have a lot of that fight or flight stuff just very, very naturally whenever I hear sirens go off. But do you have any?
For me personally, I feel like a big way that I manage my anxiety in general is planning, and usually like over planning. So I think that kind of translates into how I deal with weather. I'm not from Oklahoma. I know I've mentioned that in past episodes before. I'm from Texas. But I was I in high school, or I was in middle school. I was in like 8th grade when Hurricane Harvey happened. And thankfully my house and my family was completely fine. But we lived right next to the bayou in Houston. And the way that my neighborhood was, there was new houses, but then there was also a lot of old historical houses that were really low to the ground. And seeing the devastation that took place with the flooding in those homes, I feel like kind of made me more inclined to be a little bit more prepared for not only just weather, but anything that can happen in general surrounding weather. At least for Harvey, the power went out in Houston for like 7 days in some areas. And the saving grace for my family was the flooding stayed for days too. So nobody could go to the grocery store or go out and get supplies. That we had like some canned foods on hand, some bottles of water. And that experience, I think, kind of made me more inclined to keep things like that in my home, which I feel like helps my anxiety too, just knowing that I'm prepared. And although I can't control what happens, that I'm setting myself up for the best possible chance of success. Something that I noticed when listening to Sydney and Jack's segment was how much I, as a regular citizen, separate the weather forecasters and the news personalities from the general public, and in the same way that people kind of separate celebrities from the general public. And something I really took note of was Jack was talking about, when he goes to report on a big storm day, while that is his job, he gets anxiety about his family at home and the fact that, like he has people at home to go home to in his house and he doesn't know what's going to happen to them, or, his risk is the same as everybody else's in that situation. So, your fear and anxiety is the same. And I can imagine too that, as somebody who has that much knowledge about storms in general, that you might even have more of a heightened fear and anxiety because you're reporting and seeing the absolute worst of the worst. This summer I was driving home from an internship and we had so many, it was like that day that there was tornado warnings all over Oklahoma City and all over Norman. It was at the beginning of the summer in, I think, early June. And I was driving from the Bethany area and driving in the same direction as a news truck called the Interceptor 4. And I had never experienced severe weather anxiety until I was going in the same direction as the Interceptor 4. But one thing that I kind of noticed was that was just a regular vehicle. It's not like some crazy like military clunker, and they're going in the same direction as I am. They're in the same amount of risk as we are. And I feel like that's not something that I really registered before that experience and then listening to the earlier segment.
Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for sharing. I think that that's definitely a very common and widespread phenomenon, especially with celebrities and TV personalities. One of the things that I've always seen with like severe weather, like newscasting, is that people generally, the people recording on it generally are like, "Oh, what are you doing out here? Like you're driving through this like 5 feet of water. Like what are you doing? Go home." And it's like, I think that a lot of people just don't take that into account of being like, they have places to be, they have things to do. And sometimes like driving is like the only way to go, like in Oklahoma. And even if you have to go through like 5 feet of snow or like a flooded area, you have to do what you have to do, because sometimes people only have you. Like if you're a parent, sometimes your kids are at school and that's all that you can really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me in particular, going through a tornado is definitely traumatic in itself, but it also teaches you a lot of different things about how valuable life is, and also how like you could meet somebody one day and that could be the last time that you ever see them. And it's also taught me that it's very, very important to not only look out for yourself, but also your neighbors. In the May 20th tornado, one of my neighbors, he was a postal service delivery person, but the USPS, but he worked night shifts. So he slept through the tornado, whatever it went through our addition, and he passed away because my dad didn't have enough time to get me out of school, just walk away and all of that. And it's really just like, if you have a community of people that you keep in touch with, then I think that that's really important, like checking on one another and being like, are you okay? Have you watched the weather? Because sometimes stuff happens. Like I know with my grandparents, like they're like, oh no, it's fine, I'm just watching Hallmark or something like that. And it's like, go team, you do that. I'm glad, but please get in your storm shelter. And I think it just takes a little bit of reaching out to other people and being like, hey, I care about you, and I just want to make sure that you're safe. And that definitely lowers my anxiety, because that's the other part of that. If I know that other people are safe, then it makes me feel better about that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that kind of just ties back to everything that we do as, Nami NextGen, and how important it is to check on your people, with their mental health. And the same goes for weather. And I never really thought about it like that, which is really cool to bring that. I feel like me as a person, I am a big catastrophizer, and I tend to act with fear rather than caution, and I always jump to the worst possible situation. For some reason, I don't do that with weather, and I feel like I just kind of ignore it, which is so unlike me in every other aspect and area of my life. So I don't know why weather is the thing that's spared from that. But yeah, I think definitely checking on people is so, so important because we don't know, who's been through a traumatic experience. Like if you never had shared your experience with me, I would never know, and that can really affect, how you go about different situations and how you feel going into future weather events. And I can imagine that it's hard to rationalize, even if there's no imminent risk of a tornado. Anytime that there's bad weather in the spring in Oklahoma, that can be really scary for you. So I think that's something that, not only just we as people, but especially as Oklahomans, that's something important to be aware of. Well, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. We had so much fun filming this episode. I feel like I learned a lot from Jack and Sydney's interview and from you, Zach, and your experiences. Quick reminders, we have a couple things. The Nami NextGen applications are still open, so please, please, please apply. It has been one of the best and most meaningful experiences of my young adult life. And then Zach, our advertisement model, is going to talk about NAMIWalks.
So NAMIWalks is going to be at the Lower Scissortail Park on May 16th. That's a Saturday at 9 a.m. Make sure that you're there. We can walk together as a group, as one, and it'll be great. Hopefully traffic won't be bad, but we'll be in it together. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in again. We will see you next month. And remember to be aware, stay safe, and take care of yourself. Bye.